Yesterday at this time, we talked about the concept of courage in Homer's Iliad. Today, we're going to talk about the concept of justice in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. And again, I think they're making more handouts if you don't have one. And again, it's on the back and front. So one side's courage, and the other side is justice. And you can look it up when you get home. I've tried to use the Greek line number. So whatever translation, hopefully you can find what I'm looking at. Now, the Iliad, particularly, but also the Odyssey, it takes place in a pre-law society. Now, when I mean that, I don't mean that Homer's soldiers are studying for the LSATs, okay? By pre-law, I mean we are in a period where there is no legal justice system. There are no police. There's no lawyers. Oh, that's nice. There's no prisons, right? Now, that doesn't mean there's no law and order. Just like in any traditional society, you got the circle of old men that discuss things, right? But again, this is a society where you don't have the structure you need to stop these big soldier boys from killing everybody if they want to. In other words, how do you keep law and order in a society that doesn't have a criminal justice system? And the way you do it is by instilling virtues in the, so to speak, aristocratic people. They need to become virtuous, morally self-regulating people, or society falls apart, right? The reason our democracy is a little bit of falling apart is when we as citizens cease to be virtuous, morally self-regulating citizens, it will not last, okay? I mean, democracy particularly is a reflection of its citizens. So this is why classical Christian education is so important. We're raising up, ladies and gentlemen, citizens and things like that. And the way you do it is not just by teaching it to them, you do it by instilling it in them so it becomes second nature, so they become a sort of law unto themselves. This is not works religion, okay? The idea is that you are able to stop yourself because you sense in your inner being you're doing something wrong, right? That's why there's a difference between, if you want your kids to be healthy, one way to do it is to put a padlock on the refrigerator. The other way is to teach them to have a respect for their body, a respect for food. Because if you use the padlock, when they go away to college, whoop, there they go. Because they have no inner resources, no understanding of what physical health means. So, I'm going to see if you understand what I mean by instilling rather than teaching. Which part of our country, the North or the South, is better at instilling virtues in people? North or South? South, okay? If you got that right, then you're seeing what I mean. That doesn't mean we're all perfect down here. I spent half my life as a Yankee, half my life as Texan, right? So I've seen both sides of it. And I'm not saying that the Southerners are always more virtuous, but it is instilled still in the South in a way that it's not up north. And I would really encourage you, ladies, one of the best ways you can teach your daughter to be a fine woman is to say to her, stop being ugly. Now, I know to a mother, oh, you're telling, no. What you mean, how many of you had your mother say that to you at one time? Don't be ugly. That doesn't mean put on more mascara, girl, okay? It means you're being ugly on the inside. You're manifesting envy, bitterness, selfishness, gossip, whatever it is. And I think we need to revive that phrase because it's a phrase like that that instills in you a deeper sense. I'd like to use as a kind of a joke. If you're an American and you go into a movie theater, and let's say this is a movie theater, and everybody's spread out like this, right? Would you go and sit right in front of her? You wouldn't do it. Nobody teaches you that, but you understand that that's just not what you do. Now, once the theater fills up, then you sit where you have to, okay? They're still doing this in the airport since COVID. Right? You can't sit next to somebody now. And it's like sooner or later, all right, I'm exhausted, I'm sitting here, okay? There's no every other seat, I'm sitting here, right? But what I'm getting at is that's one of the things that's not taught to you. It's instilled in you as a kind of courteous way of interacting with the world. And what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to teach you 4 Greek words, and these are some of the things that were instilled in Achilles and Hector the same, right, and Odysseus, instilled in them to allow them to internalize a kind of justice. And we're going to go over 4 words on your eidos, nemesis, just got the word, themis, and xenia. And we'll go, some of you have heard of xenia before. Most of you may not have heard of the other words. Okay. Eidos and nemesis are the Greek words that mean shame and blame. Okay? You want to raise your children in such a way that they will avoid doing anything that is shameful, that will bring shame upon themselves or shame upon their family name. Very few people say this, but again, you're infinitely more likely in the South to hear someone say, when you go to college, don't do anything to bring shame on our family name. You're not going to hear any Yankees say that. And even today, you're not going to hear that many Southerners, but you might hear a few of them, right? You avoid that which brings shame to you. Because if you do something shameful, you are likely to bring down nemesis. Now, eidos is not a word you hear in English, but nemesis is a word that's come directly into our language. Usually it means the hero's arch enemy, Lex Luthor, or the Green Goblin, if you read Spider-Man, right? That maintains a little bit of the original idea of nemesis is the blame that comes down to... How many of you grew up watching Hercules, The Legendary Journeys? Come on, weren't you excited when you found out Kevin Sorbo was a very strong Christian and still going strong? They actually had a character that appeared every so often who was this cute little girl with a bow and arrow. She was Nemesis, who shoots you down when you do something that is shameful. And I'm going to tell you right now, the absolute worst thing that ever happened to public education is called the self-esteem movement. You ever heard of that? The self-esteem movement is you never allow your students to feel bad about themselves. They just have to be always affirmed no matter what they do. That is a wonderful method for creating monsters, isn't it? Okay? You have to I'm not necessarily saying we have to go back to dunce caps, but maybe we do, okay? Put them back in the corner because they need to feel shame, right? And then they won't want to feel that way again. Now, unfortunately, even amongst conservatives now, sometimes the idea of shame and blame has been so demonized, we're afraid of it. Because, yeah, it's true, in some Muslim countries, there's what's called a shame killing, right? A girl gets raped, not her fault, and then sometimes her family might kill her. Okay, that's not what we're talking about, okay? Anything could be abused. Shame is an internal sense that you have done something that has cut you off from right and whatever gentlemanly behavior. And throughout the Iliad, and I've got all the quotes there for you, or all the book and line numbers. Okay, if any of you have read the Iliad, reading it is kind of like watching a football or a soccer game where one side gets the psych. It's like, and they're like, charging, right? And the Trojans are running and they're terrified. And then one Trojan stands up and says, shame, right? And gives them a pep rally. And then, and they turn around and they go back. Just like watching a crazy football game or something like that. It's all about psych, as we would say today. And the number one way in the Iliad that both the Trojans and the Greeks will call the cowards to order and get them to be men is to say the word eidos. I'll just give you one example here. There's so many of them. It says, okay, they're running wild, okay? And then it says, Hera shouted, because Hera likes the Greeks, likening herself to high-hearted, brawn-voiced Stentor who could cry out in as great a voice as 50 other men. So she disguises herself as a man named Stentor and yells. Does anybody know what word we got from that? Old-fashioned word, stentorian. Stentorian means you speak with a loud, booming voice. So that literally comes right from that passage in the Iliad. I think that's kind of cool, right? You like that. People look at me like I'm an idiot, but you like to know that the word mentor actually comes from the Odyssey, right? You know that, right? Okay. So this is what Hera, disguised as Stentor, says. Shame, you Argives, poor non-entities, splendid to look on. In other words, you guys look strong and tall, but shame. You have a deer's heart, as Achilles likes to say to Agamemnon. Shame. The closest I can get to that is if you're in the Marines and the drill sergeant wants to strike you out, he'll say, ladies. You've heard that? Now, I don't know what they do when there's a woman. They say that's her too, lady? I don't know. But anyway, that's the closest equivalent. You're shaming them. How can you live with yourself if you're living like this, okay? Get up, pull yourself together, and get going. You feel like Jordan Peterson is talking to you, right? Clean your room, buddy. Stand up straight and get going, okay? There we go. And how many girlfriends give your boyfriend a copy of Jordan Peterson, okay? Get a life, man, okay? Have some guts. Have some cojones for our Spanish-speaking people. Okay, but the idea of shame is to not make them hang their head, but make them say, oh, I don't want that kind of shame, and I will go after it. I give one other example, because this is on the Trojan side, because again, it's just the same. And here, I got too many page numbers. Okay, here it says, the Trojan speaks, and it says, so he spoke, Hector, so Hector spoke, and all of them stayed stricken to silence in shame of refusing him and in fear to take up his challenge. So now it's being kind of used in the third person, okay? But they feel shame, and that shame motivates them to do a courageous act. And this gets all linked to justice, because you internalize justice by avoiding doing that which is shameful and trying to do that which does not bring shame upon you. I cannot tell you how important this is to the human soul and the human psyche. Shame plays an important function. I wish I had time. I'll just say it to you really quickly. Shame does for our soul what pain does for our body. Nobody likes to feel pain, but pain, believe it or not, is a blessing. Because if you didn't feel pain, and that's what happens to people who have leprosy, it messes up their central nervous system, and they don't feel pain, you know what would happen to you if you didn't have pain sensors? You would literally fall apart. You would get, you know when you get a fleck of something in your eye, it hurts so much, you'll spend all day getting it out. Imagine if there was no pain sensor in your eye, it would get in there, it would go deeper and deeper, it would fester, and you might lose your sight. And that happens to lepers sometimes, right? So pain is a blessing because it is a signal that there's something wrong with your body and you better fix it. And if the pain is really sharp, it means there's really something wrong. This is an emergency. Fix it now. Okay, now, we live in a fallen world. If I were to get cancer, God forbid, it would mess up my pain center and I would be in continual pain and I might need morphine or something like that because that's an unnatural kind of pain. But the way it works, the way God made us, pain is a signal to protect us. In the same way, I would argue, shame is a signal that we're doing something that's hurting our soul, right? Shame is good. Now, we live in a fallen world. If you are a soldier who has been shell-shocked, or if you are a woman who was raped or abused when she was young, you might have what we call PTSD. And you will now have an unhealthy kind of shame that needs to be dealt with through drugs, through speaking, through a little bit of both. But but shame, 95% of the time, shame is a healthy signal that tells you, stop, you're hurting your soul, you're twisting your soul on the inside, and you better stop this behavior. But again, shame is something we instill. When my son was young and he did something bad, I was ashamed of you. You were not very responsible. And what happens? Oh, then you go over and you hug him and you say, but I love you. Don't hug him and say, it's no big deal. It is a big deal, okay? They need to feel the shame. But then you say, but I love you. In fact, the reason I'm ashamed is because I love you and I know you're better than that, okay? And maybe you can't hug your students like you hug your kids, but who knows? It depends on your headmaster, whether they throw you out, okay? So, but just keep that in mind. Shame is, I mean, we teach it, but it's really something that's instilled in the society that you just don't behave like that. And anytime you meet somebody that behaves in a bad way, what do you think? Did this guy grow up in a cave, right? Like, didn't anybody teach him manners? But really, did anybody instill manners? So that's, Eidos, that's an easy understanding. But nemesis, I'm going to give you 3 examples where nemesis is used in a kind of a clever way. Nemesis, again, the blame that will come down upon you if you do that which is shameful. Right? Did any of you have a parent or grandparent say when you went to college, don't do anything to bring shame on our family name? Any of you? Okay, so some of you, okay, there we go. From Alabama or something like that, okay? But this is important. We've lost a sense of this. It used to be if I had a student from Japan or China, they were probably told the same thing. But even now, they're not being told, oh, what was that? I mean, no, don't do anything that's shameful. Okay, let me show you blame. I'm going to give you some really fun little stories here. Okay. While the battle is going on in front of the wall of Troy, there is a watchtower, and on the top of the tower is where King Priam and the old men who are too old to fight are up there watching the battle, and of course being armchair generals, of course, and watching everything, right? And while the old men are watching, Helen of Troy walks by. Are any of you old enough to remember Linda Carter as Wonder Woman? Okay, I remember like my grandfather just stopped. You know, just pigeon, you know, whatever. I mean, it's just there's something about that. All the old guys just love Linda Carter as Wonder Woman. But anyway, as Helen goes by, all the guys are watching her, checking her out. And this is what they say. It's really funny. As she goes by, they say, surely there is no blame on Trojans and strong grieved Achaeans if for a long time they suffer hardship for a woman like this one. Terrible is the likeness of her face to immortal goddesses. By the way, that is the only description we get of Helen, right? In fact, we don't get almost any descriptions of any physical descriptions, you know, nose, and I'll give you one example, one exception later, only one exception. So that's it. We never get an actual description, but again, terrible is, not terrible, like it's like awesome is her face to an immortal goddess. But notice what they said. Surely there is no nemesis, okay? She is so beautiful that fighting a bloody war for her will not bring retribution or nemesis down on her head. That's how good looking she is, okay? Wow, that's kind of a cool way of thinking about it. Otherwise, this would bring nemesis. We're fighting over something so stupid, it's going to bring blame and retribution down upon it, but not here. That's how amazing Helen is, okay? Here's another one that's a little bit different. Okay, Helen doesn't say a whole lot in this book, but what she says is absolutely memorable. And I'm going to show you how spunky Helen is, right? Helen is actually from Sparta. She's Helen of Sparta, and that's where my family's from. So we get the most beautiful woman in the world, okay? The Greeks got mad when they watched Troy, and Helen was played by a German girl who's beautiful, Diana Kruger. But really? You can't find a Greek? Okay, good Lord. They made that Odyssey on TV, and they got an Italian guy who was good. But really, you can't find a Greek? Okay. The patron saint of Greece is Anthony Quinn. He was Mexican, okay? But he played Zorba the Greek, and he's like our patron saint. Okay, anyway, amazing. So in this scene, some of you know that in book 3, they decide to have a duel, one-on-one, between Paris and Menelaus, winner takes all. Well, Menelaus quickly gets him, and Paris is almost done for when Aphrodite, the goddess of love, to whom he gave the golden apple, some of you know the apple of discord, and she grabs him and spirits him away to bed, to Helen's bed. And then Aphrodite, in this scene, goes to Helen and says, oh, Helen, your husband's waiting for you. Go to bed. If you're Helen, you want to go to bed with him now? This utter coward? You want me to go now? He just shamed himself in front of everybody? Because the girls, too, the princesses, they also care about Eidos and Nemesis. So she said, again, this is a goddess. Watch what she says. Strange divinity, why are you still so stubborn to beguile me? Will you carry me further yet somewhere among cities fairly settled? In Phrygia or in lovely Maeonia? Is there some mortal man there also who is dear to you? Is it because Menelaus has beaten Paris and wishes, hateful even as I am, to carry me homeward? Is it for this that you stand in your treachery now beside me? Oh, go yourself and sit beside him. Abandon the gods' ways. Turn your feet back, never again to the path of Olympus, but stay with him forever and suffer for him and look after him until he makes you his wedded wife or makes you his slave girl. Do you understand what she's saying to the goddess? If you like him so much, you go be his. You can fill in the street language right there, because that's exactly what she's saying. You go ahead. I'm not going. And why won't she go? She says, not I. I am not going to him. It would be too shameful. Now that's, Lattimore is wrong. He should say it would be too blameful. Because what it literally says is, I won't go to him. It would be too nemesis. If I went to bed with this coward right now, it would bring retribution down upon me. And she says, I will not serve his bed, since the Trojan women hereafter would laugh at me all, and my heart even now is confused with sorrows. What she's saying is, she doesn't want to be ashamed in front of the women. Because all the aristocrats, male or female, still live by eidos and nemesis, and she will not be shamed, okay? See, men have fun, you know, like when you're the wife and you have company coming over and like you're fussing over it, and like your husband's like, who cares? I care, okay? Because I'm going to be shamed in front of all the other women, because they notice these things. The men don't notice, okay? I don't know if you've noticed this, men, but when your wife goes out on a date with you, she just puts on whatever's in her closet and goes. When she's going out with her lady friends, you will see that she has 5 outfits spread out on her bed, because she has to choose exactly the right one so she will not be shamed in front of her female friends who actually notice these things, okay? Your wife, your husband, oh, is that new? Is that something new? Whatever, okay. So this is how you keep order. It's got to be instilled in people, not just learned. I'll give you one more example that's an absolutely fascinating view of this. Those of you that were here, how many of you were here yesterday? Oh, okay, most of you. Okay, well, what happens is, again, in book 1, Agamemnon steals away Achilles' meed of honor, his concubine, whose name is Briseis. And he gets mad because they're fighting for these trophies, and he pulls out of the war. And then in book 9, we talked about this yesterday, a deputation or an embassy from Agamemnon come and offer him all of these gifts, these war prizes called meeds of honor, if he will come back in. And look what it says. This is amazing. Phoenix is his tutor, and this is what he says. He's explaining to him that, you know, you need to take these gifts and come back in. And he explains it to him this way. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. He says, look, he says, if Agamemnon were not bringing gifts and naming still more hereafter Atreus' son, were he to remain still swollen with rancor, even I would not bid you throw your anger aside, nor defend the Argives, though they needed you sorely. Now, because Achilles is refusing to fight, Greeks are dying left and right. But up until now, believe it or not, the Greeks are not mad at Achilles, because they understand 100% why he's not fighting. Because we're fighting for war prizes. Your war prize was stolen. You were publicly shamed in front of everybody. We're not mad at you. But, here's always the but see now, Agamemnon offers you much straight away and has promised you more hereafter. He has sent the best men to you. I love that. We are the best men. Right? Did you ever watch Lord of the Rings? And the elves, fairest of all people, is Galadriel who's saying that. I just love that. Anyway, he says, he has sent the best men to you to supplicate you, choosing them out of the Achaean host, those who to yourself are the dearest of all the Argives. Do not make vain their argument, Achilles, nor their footsteps, though before this one could not blame your anger. In Greek, up until now, no nemesis. Of course, the implication is, if you don't accept the gifts now and go back, nemesis will come down upon him in the death of Patroclus and eventually his own death. So, again, avoid what is shameful, because if you persist in shameful behavior, you will bring sort of divine retribution down upon you. Okay, so eidos and nemesis, our culture has lost that. Okay, a lot of Asian cultures and a lot of Middle Eastern cultures still have a shame-blame culture. Again, sometimes it's bad, but a lot of times it's good, and we're the ones that are bad. And in fact, one of the reasons that our generals and soldiers make so much mistakes in the Middle East is we refuse to understand shame and blame. You cannot publicly shame a sheik. I don't care. If he loses face in front of his people, he'll do crazy things to save face. We need to understand. That's why we have so many problems when we go into worlds like that. Of course, the best shame, blame culture is the Klingons. But, anyway, we start right there. That's a blame, shame culture. Okay. But let's talk about something else now. Two other words that are a little different. Okay. The Greeks have different words for justice. Dike is the word for justice. Dikaiosune is righteousness. But there's another word called themis, Themis. And themis, it means justice, but it really means the right way of doing things, the right order or the right conduct. This is the proper way to do things. And it's quite amazing. Those of you who have read the Iliad, in Book 2, we meet somebody who completely lacks themis. Does anybody recognize the name? Here, let me turn to it. Did you say it? His name is Thersites. I don't know if you recognize the name Thersites. He only appears very briefly in it's in Book 2. He appears briefly. And this is how Homer introduces him. Now, if you were here yesterday, I told you that you never get the name of a hero, male or female, without a patronymic, their father's name, and without an epithet, a description of them, swift-footed Achilles, Hector, tamer of horses. In the whole book, Thersites is the only person who's given no patronymic. This is how we meet him. Now, okay, they're all sitting down deciding what to do, whether they should leave or go on. So they all sat down, and they were orderly in their places, but one man, Thersites of the endless speech. He has no patronymic, but he has an epithet of the endless speech. Quarrelsome. Okay, let's just put this. Okay, I would argue, I don't know if anybody agree with me, that this is in some ways the first anti-hero in Western literature. This is the very first Holden Caulfield. You know who that is? That pathetic kid in Catcher of the Rye, okay? And all the other pathetic kids we've gotten in our literature since then. Oh my gosh, okay? They all got, and sometimes that happens in great literature. Does anybody know the pathetic person who appears in Dostoevsky? Have you ever read Notes from Underground? Okay? Here is the sort of anti-hero, like that never gets along with anybody and refuses. This is a person who lacks themis. So let's see what it says. Okay, so we have Thersites of the endless speech, still scolded, watch this, who knew within his head many words, but disorderly. Have you met people like that? Many words in it, but they're all smacked, like somebody smacked them in the head, and they're all mixed up, right? Vain and without decency, to quarrel with the princes with any word he thought might be amusing to the Argives. You know what we would call this person today online? A troll, okay? This is the first troll in literature as well. So, and now watch this. I told you there are no real physical descriptions of anybody. This is the only physical description I can find in the Iliad. This is how he's described. This man, Thersites, this was the ugliest man who came beneath Troy. He was bandy-legged and went lame of one foot, with shoulders stooped and drawn together over his chest. And above this, his skull went up to a point with the wool grown sparsely upon it. The first cone head in history, if you remember the old Saturday Night Live. You know, when it used to be funny. Anyway, he said, now, beyond all others, Achilles hated him and Odysseus. Hey, the two heroes, Achilles and Odysseus, they particularly hate Thersites because he completely lacks themis. They're not making fun of him because he's got a blemish. I mean, he is just disorderly and rude and just sticks out like a sore thumb, right? And it says, these two, Thersites, Achilles and Odysseus, Thersites was forever abusing. That's the ones he hates the most. But now, at brilliant Agamemnon, he clashed the shrill noise of his abuse. And he goes on, and there's an incredible scene where he and then finally Odysseus gets fed up and he picks up this like staff and he smacks him. And and like this big welt grew up. And it's like they didn't want to laugh, but they couldn't help themselves. Okay? Now, you know who he reminds me? Okay, let's see. There is a character in Genesis that I think a lot of modern people feel sorry for this fool. But I don't think Genesis wants us to feel sorry for him. You know what I'm talking about? He was the brother of somebody. Who was Jacob's brother? Isaac. Jacob and Esau. Esau is the big hairy guy. That's not bad, by the way. But he's the big hairy guy who sells his birthright for a mess of pottage, okay, lentil stew or something like that, right? So I think a lot of Americans say, oh, I feel so bad, you know. And Jacob, by the way, gets his comeuppance, okay? But we feel bad how he fools them again by stealing the blessing from his father. But I don't think the Bible feels sorry for him. He is what the Bible calls a fool. It's a good word. And fool doesn't just mean stupid, it means morally deficient. The fool pops up a lot in Proverbs. To me, this is something very similar to Proverbs. So again, he has no themes. He has no right order, no right conduct. And he sticks out like a sore thumb. And if everybody in the military was like this guy, everything would fall apart. Right? But now let's get to the final word, and we'll spend the rest of our time on this. It's a word most of you have heard, xenia. Xenia. Xenia, that's more of a Latin pronunciation of it. Xenia means, literally the word xenos or xeni means a guest or a stranger. That's why xenophobia means a fear of strangers or a fear of foreigners, okay? Zeus, one of his titles is Zeus Xenos, which means Zeus the guest god. In this culture and in other cultures, right, the guest or stranger at your door is sacred. Xenia defines the rules of hospitality between guest and host. And that's what we're going to talk about in a moment when we get to the Odyssey. But a lot of readers of the Iliad don't realize that Xenia is a little bit bigger than guest and host. In a way, Xenia defines the relationship between the stronger party and the weaker party. Because if you're the guest and he's the stranger, he's the weaker one, generally speaking. You're in your home, right? And if you teach your children, be nice to the guests because they're at your mercy. Who is the worst host in the Narnia books? Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserves it. And he makes it, Lucy and Edmund don't want to, because he knows how to make them uncomfortable because they're in a house that's not their own, right? So but also in the Iliad, Xenia also relates to this. Some of you have read some of Shakespeare's history plays like Henry V, and you're always amazed at how the person on the battlefield always finds his exact aristocratic equivalent on the other side. They must have big signs or something like that, right? And when you're fighting, just like in the Middle Ages, I'm fighting and I defeat you. And I've got you at spear point. And you say, please, you supplicate. That's the literal word. In Iliad, it means I grab you by the knees, and I grab your beard, because any self-respecting Greek has a beard, okay? Because you know that Greek boys get their beard when they're 13. Greek girls don't get their beard till they're 18. But anyway, sorry, Greek ladies out there. Oh, my lovely Italian girls. But anyway, so yeah, there we go. Yeah, it is. So you grab them by the chin, and you supplicate them, and you say, have mercy on me. Now, this is not Christianity. Don't just let me away. It's, I will give you a ransom, a worthy ransom, and please let me go. And some of you know that the whole story behind the Robin Hood tales, now the true thing is on his way back from the Crusades, Richard the Lionhearted was, I think it was Austria, and was being held for ransom. And at least in the legends, evil Prince John is stealing all the money from the Saxons to make the ransom to get Richard back, but of course he never gives the money, okay? So in the Middle Ages, there's that understanding as well, right? So, and that's why if you've ever read Henry V by Shakespeare, Henry says, I refuse to accept ransom. I will die alongside you. It's a way of saying, I'm not an armchair general. I'm going to be just like a regular person. I'm going to fight and no mercy, okay? I'm not going to buy my way out of it. So, okay, so that's what happens. I supplicate you and I say, please have mercy on me. Take the ransom. Now, if I don't have money, sometimes the ransom will be, I'll sell you into slavery, and that's how I'll get money. And that happens over here too. But if somebody supplicates you, you are supposed to honor that and do it. And when that relationship breaks down, that is the ultimate injustice, right? Justice instilled in you is to, so I'm going to give you a series of examples in the Iliad where this happens, because it happens quite often. Let me see. Wait, okay, I lost my page number. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, I've got to go back. I've got a little hodgepodge of things. Okay, back to 98. Okay. So, wait, did I do something wrong? Sorry. 75, okay. You should do this with your kids at Christmas time. When they go to open up their gift, inside the gift is a clue. And the clue takes them somewhere in the house, and then there's another clue. That's what my book looks like. It's going back and forth. Great stuff to do with the kids. Okay, and if you can come up with a clue that's a rhyming couplet or quatrain, even better. You should do it. Okay, now, the Iliad begins. Okay, first of all, we all know what caused the Iliad, caused the Trojan War, when Paris, a bad guest, steals Helen away and takes her home. The Iliad, as you know, takes place in the last year of a 10-year war. But interestingly, this story within the story also begins with a breach of Xenia. Because what happens is, just before the Iliad begins, Agamemnon and all of them had sacked a town called Thebe. And when you sack a town, you take all the spoils, and those spoils include captive women. And they took a girl, Agamemnon took for himself Chryseis. And Chryseis' father, that was his only child. So Chryseis comes to Agamemnon, like the first page of the book, comes to him and kneels down and says, supplicates him, please return my daughter, my only child, and I will give you ransom. And everybody agrees. But Agamemnon says no. He refuses. And then he compounds it by stealing Achilles' concubine away. So this breach in Xenia is what actually sets off all the bad stuff that happens within the Iliad, the war within the war, okay? And let me show you something, because if you teach the Iliad, this may confuse your students. After Achilles pulls out of the war, he has an epic tantrum. And he's like, I'm going to make everybody suffer. So he goes to his mother, Thetis, who's a goddess, the first helicopter parent, and says, Mother, okay, I want you to go to Zeus and tell him to let the Greeks start losing, then they'll have to beg me to come back, okay? So Thetis goes to Zeus, and this is what happens. And maybe you've read this before. It says, Thetis, she came and sat beside Zeus with her left hand embracing his knees, but took him underneath the chin with her right hand and spoke in supplication to Lord Zeus, son of Kronos. Now, if your students don't know what I just told you, they're going to think there's something kinky going on here. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's not kinky at all. She is putting herself, and there's a famous, is it by David? There's a famous painting of her holding him like this. I can't remember, it's David or somebody like that during the neoclassical age made it. But she is putting herself in the literal position of a supplicant, holding the knees, holding the chin or the beard, and supplicating. And Zeus does answer her prayer, even though it's a terrible prayer. Okay, let's jump ahead. Book 6, those of you that were here, in Book 6 is that wonderful human moment where Hector says farewell to his wife, and it's this beautiful moment. But Homer almost needs to give us that scene to counterbalance what happens in the beginning of Book 6. Because in the beginning of Book 6, Menelaus, right, the injured party, has captured a Trojan and has him at the point. And as he does it, this guy falls, and the Trojan's name is Adrestus. And Homer says, but Adrestus, catching him by the knees, supplicated, take me alive, son of Atreus, and take appropriate ransom. In my rich father's house, the treasures lie piled in abundance, right? And he explains it. And then Homer says, so he spoke and moved the spirit inside Menelaus. And now he was on the point of handing him to a henchman to lead him back to the fast Achaean ship. So take him over here, and we'll hold you hostage until the ransom comes. Everything's fine. And then his brother Agamemnon comes running by. And Agamemnon says, dear brother, O Menelaus, are you concerned so tenderly with these people? Did you and your house get the best of treatment from the Trojans? No, let not one of them go free of sudden death at our hands, not the young man child that the mother carries still in her body, not even he, but let all of Iliad's people perish, utterly blotted out and unmourned for. This is not a good thing. And what happens is Menelaus stabs him, pulls it. That leads to madness. And then Nestor, the old guy, says, all right, let's go. Kill everybody now and ask questions later. Literally what he says, okay? I mean, again, we have to understand and explain to our children how tenuous civilization is. Even us with the criminal justice system, which we can no longer trust, but anyway, with a justice system, it can break down at any day. If all of us cease to be morally self-regulated, it falls apart. The Iliad shows us what happens when just one very, very powerful young man named Achilles, I told you yesterday, Achilles is about 19 years old in this book. What happens when he has an epic tantrum and destroys pity and destroys everything else? So that sets off all sorts of problems. Okay, well, if you think that's bad, okay, when Achilles finally goes back to war after the death of Patroclus, he is a killing machine. He kills hundreds of people and throws their body in the river Scamander. And there's so many dead bodies that the river is choking on the blood and cries out, stop, right? It's amazing what happens. In the midst of this, what Homer calls the wrath of Achilles, or the rage of Achilles, he suddenly comes upon a young man named Lycon. Now, Lycon is he's the most poor sucker in history, okay? Lycon is a son of Priam. And several years earlier, Achilles had captured him, and he begged him, let me go, so Achilles sold him into slavery. After many years, Priam has found his son, paid the ransom, he's on his way back home, and who does he run into? Achilles. Oh my God, all over again. Literally, he falls down, and it says, Lycon, again, right here, with one hand had taken Achilles by the knees in supplication, and with the other held and would not let go of the edged spear. So this time, instead of his chin, holding onto the spear, and he spoke aloud to him and addressed him in winged words, Achilles, I am at your knees. Respect my position. Have mercy upon me. I am in the place illustrious of a suppliant who must be honored, for you were the first beside whom I tasted the yield of Demeter. So he reminds him of Markos' lecture, okay? You know how this works? Don't do it. Now, if this was the old Achilles, he would have let him go. But when he makes that plea, this is what he hears. So the glorious son of Priam addressed him, speaking in supplication, but heard in turn the voice without pity. We have that at my university. We call it the business office. So the voice, sometimes the registrar, the voice without pity. And look what he says. Poor fool. No longer speak to me of ransom, nor argue it. In the time before Patroclus came to the day of his death's destiny, then it was the way of my heart's choice to be sparing of the Trojans, and many I took alive and disposed of them. Now there is not one who can escape death if the gods send him against my hands in front of Ilion, not one of all the Trojans, and beyond others, the children of Priam. So, friend, you die also. Why all this clamor about it? Patroclus also is dead, who is better by far than you are. Do you not see what a man I am? How huge, how splendid, and born of a great father, and the mother who bore me immortal? Yet even I have also my death and my strong destiny, and there shall be a dawn or an afternoon or a noontime when some man in the fighting will take the life from me also, either with a spear cast or an arrow flown from the bowstring. And he ends by saying, even so, die all an evil death, till all of you pay for the death of Patroclus and the slaughter of the Achaeans, whom you killed beside the running ships, when I was not with them. There's a little bit of guilt there. He says, look, Patroclus is dead, who is better by far than you. Look at me, how splendid, and my mother immortal. Yet I too will have my destiny, and an arrow will get me in the morning or at noon or night. So let everyone die. This is what we call a council of despair. This is the lowest point for Achilles. He doesn't care about justice. He doesn't care about Eidos or Nemesis or anything. And he kills him in cold blood. This is the kind of act that tears down all of civilization. It sort of sets off a domino effect, on and on and on. And some of you know that a little bit later, he will kill Hector. And in his fury, he will tie Hector's, kind of his heels, to a car and drag his naked body around and around the walls of Troy, desecrating the body, refusing to give the body back to his family for proper burial, in this case, cremation. And it's the only mistake that Homer made. Cremation is what they were doing in Homer's time. In the time of Troy, they were burying just like the Egyptians, because we've got the archaeology. But most of the stuff Homer got right, because Homer's living 500 years after the Trojan War. Okay, so anyway, what he does is, I'm not giving the body back. And then the gods go to Priam and say, go into the camp and ransom back the body of your son. And you imagine that terrified old man goes into there, and he finds his way into the tent of Achilles, and he rushes into the tent, and look what it says, this amazing scene. It says, tall Priam came in unseen by the other men and stood close beside him and caught the knees of Achilles in his arms and kissed the hands that were dangerous and manslaughtering and had killed so many of his sons. And he supplicates him, Achilles, like the gods, remember your father. Honor the gods, Achilles, and take pity upon me, remembering your father, yet I am still more pitiful. I have gone through what no other mortal on earth has gone through. I put my lips to the hands of the man who has killed my children. If you've ever seen Troy, Priam is played by the great Peter O'Toole, and I saw him interviewed when he said that's why he took the role, just to make this speech. The horror of having to kiss the hand, because he didn't just kill Hector, he killed like almost all of his sons, like a dozen of his sons. Now, I want you to understand that if at this point, and by the way, I've written some children's novels. One's called The Dreaming Stone. Have anybody seen my children's novels? Where my kids become part of it. But it's called In the Shadow of Troy. They become part of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And in my version, Achilles is about to kill Priam, and my son stops him. Because you have to understand that if Achilles jumped up and killed Priam now, we would be living in a totally different world. It's like a mirror universe, okay? But this book of such destruction ends with him weeping together with his enemy. As Priam weeps for his son Hector, Achilles weeps for Patroclus, and he also weeps for his father, though he's still alive. That's what they do in the Achilles family. They weep for people who are still alive. His mother's been weeping for him since he was born. But anyway, they're not even mourning the same person, but together they recognize each other's humanity. And finally, when the suppliant is honored, it brings a sense of peace. Now, the Iliad is a difficult work, and it's a difficult work morally and ethically. And just a little bit later, Achilles tries to comfort Priam, and he comes up with a sort of metaphor to explain the nature of the world. And I wonder if any of you have ever read this before. He says to him, there are two urns, like vases, right? There are two urns, I'm sorry, I lost my place. There are two urns that stand on the doorsill of Zeus. They are unlike for the gifts they bestow, an urn of evils, an urn of blessings. If Zeus, who delights in thunder, mingles these and bestows them on man, he shifts and moves now in evil, again in good fortune. But when Zeus bestows from the urn of sorrows, he makes a failure of man, and the evil hunger drives him over the shining earth, and he wanders respected neither of gods nor mortals. That's kind of a bleak, sort of, maybe not nihilistic, but certainly existential view of the world, okay? It's just arbitrary. God has the two urns, okay? And sometimes blessings, and sometimes, I hope none of you work for a headmaster like that. But anyway, so it's arbitrary down there. And that's the best we can get in the Iliad. But the Odyssey takes place in a different world. If you were here yesterday, I said that unlike the Iliad, the Odyssey is a melodrama. That doesn't mean it's bad. Melodrama means the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad. Okay? And it's a world that ethically is a little bit clearer for us. Now, there are people that still say, Homer couldn't have written both the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're so different. I mean, I might have said that until I read somebody who wrote tragedies, comedies, histories, and romances, okay? If Shakespeare could do it, like I said, you can do it, right? And I will tell you right away why it's so clear that we have the same author here. Because in Book 1 of the Odyssey, right? First of all, Book 1 of the Iliad begins in the Greek camp, and it ends on Mount Olympus with a dispute. Book 1 of the Odyssey literally reverses. We begin on Mount Olympus with a discussion between Athena and her father Zeus, and then we end in the palace of Ithaca, the palace of Odysseus. Now, what happens here is kind of amazing. Athena is not the mother of Odysseus, but she's the sort of patron goddess. And she comes to Zeus to beg him, are you going to help my son or what? But when she gets there, things are still in a little bit of turmoil. Because there was this guy named Agamemnon. And when Agamemnon came home, his wife and lover's name was Aegisthus, killed Agamemnon. And about 7 years later, when his son Orestes grew to manhood, he went back and avenged his father and killed Aegisthus. And this is going on simultaneously to Odysseus coming home. And Zeus is really upset for this reason. Look what I'm serious. It's literally as if Zeus read book 24 of the Iliad that I just read to you about the two urns and said, scandal, okay? No, what's the word I want? Libel. Libel, libel, libel. Because literally, this is what he says. It's unbelievable. He says, things turned around. It says, what a lamentable thing it is, Zeus says, that men should blame the gods and regard us as the source of their troubles, when it is their own transgressions which brings them suffering that was not their destiny. Consider Aegisthus. It was not his destiny to steal Agamemnon's wife and murder her husband when he came home. He knew the result would be utter disaster, since we ourselves had sent Hermes, Mercury, the keen-eyed giant slayer, to warn him, neither to kill the man, nor to court his wife. For Orestes, as Hermes told him, was bound to avenge Agamemnon as soon as he grew up, and thought with longing of his home. Yet with all his friendly counsel, Hermes failed to dissuade him, and now Aegisthus has paid the final price for all his sin. Fool! We warned him again and again. Do not touch that man's wife. Do not kill him when he comes home, or retribution, nemesis, will come in the form of Orestes. And that's what happens. Now, I wish I had an extra 20 minutes to tell you how brilliant Homer is. Because if you know the full story of Orestes, it's a story with murder and cannibalism and fathers sacrificing their daughters and wives killing their husbands and sons killing their mothers. But Homer literally takes a taboo-ridden story and turns it into a simple melodrama that seems to be based on the postman always rings twice, if you know film noir. Okay, it's just the two scheme together, and then the lover kills the husband, and then someone kills. And again, that's still bad, but it's a melodrama. There's a simple good and evil. There's no weird taboos like an Oedipus that we know what to make of. So Homer knows what he's doing, right? And what he wants to show us is, in this world, you are going to get your just desserts. Now, if you have a world that's made like that, you better have a nice, easy way to be able to distinguish the good guys from the bad guys. And they do, okay? A good guy honors Xenia. A bad guy dishonors Xenia. How does Xenia work? Hospitality, it works this way. If a stranger comes to your door, you as a host are duty-bound to take him into your house, no questions asked, feed him, clothe him, maybe even give him a gift, and only then do you ask his name. Isn't it unbelievable? This is hospitality. Now, on the other side, as a guest, it is my job to be courteous, not to eat you out of house and home, not to overstay my welcome, and certainly not to steal your wife and go home with her, okay? So there is, and whenever somebody is a bad host or a bad guest, they suffer. Anybody that's a good host or a good guest, they're the good guys, right? And the entire book works like this. It's very, very simple. And in fact, we know in this book that Telemachus is going to be a good guy, the son of Achilles, who is about 19 years old, just like Achilles is, right? A coming-of-age story, as we say. And some of you know the story. He's home waiting for his father, dreaming about his father coming home and setting everything to right. And Athena walks in disguised as a mortal man. Right? Mentes, later it's mentor. Comes in. And now, most of you know the story. For the last 3 years, there are an evil group of suitors who are eating Penelope and Telemachus out of house and home. They are the absolute worst guests from hell. And in walks this stranger. And you know what? These suitors do nothing. They won't even share their stolen food with the guest, right? But when they come, so we know they're bad. But when they come in, look what happens. This is what Homer tells us. As they come in, it says, the first to see her, to really see her, was Telemachus, the godlike youth who was sitting disconsolate among the suitors, imagining how his noble father might come back out of the blue, drive the suitors headlong from the house, and so regain his royal honors and reign over his own once more. Full of these visions, he caught sight of Athena and set off at once for the porch, ashamed that a stranger should be kept standing at the gates. Okay, this tells us that he not only honors the rules of Xenia, he has internalized that. That's why he feels ashamed immediately when he sees a stranger being unattended to. You understand that? Okay? I still can't decide whether it's you folks from Alabama or Tennessee or Louisiana or Kentucky who are the most hospitable. I've been to all of them. They're wonderful. I don't know. That was a pretty good meal you gave. But again, a lot of hospitable people down south. Okay? Okay. What this means is that nobody has to prompt him. He feels inside immediately that he's got to do it. Now, I'm going to say this because another good Southern thing is making your sons and daughters, especially your daughters, hard to get the sons, to write thank you notes. Now, it is extremely important, but you must also teach them to be thankful and grateful. Because if all they do is write notes, but they don't feel any gratitude, that's in a way worse. You become a Pharisee. So I've already done what I'm supposed to. That's why I love how a lot of Asian culture is gift giving, but I don't like the fact that in Asian culture, somebody gives you a gift and you must give them a gift back. That's like, I mean, I'm not saying that's bad, but that's different than real hospitality and generosity, okay? You give without expecting back. It's not balancing the scales, true Xenia. So this is what you have to do. And so we see that Telemachus has internalized that and feels Xenia as well. And then again, I wish we had time, but most of you know that you go through, Telemachus is not only a good host, when he goes to visit Menelaus and Nestor in books 3 and 4, he proves to be a good guest. He's mannerly, he's honorable, all of that sort of stuff, unlike the suitors, right, who are bad guests. And if you've read the opening of the Odyssey, it's interesting. It says that Odysseus had a lot of problems and all of his men died. Why? Because they were fools, because they ate the sacred cattle of the sun. So Odysseus's men are just like the suitors, right? They have been bad guests, and they pay the penalty for it. Thankfully, Odysseus meets a lot of good guests, the Phaeacians, the Aeolus, the wind god, all these. He also meets a very bad guest, a host, and that's Polyphemus. And there is a grim joke at the center of the Odyssey. If you're a good host, you feed your stranger first, and then you ask his name. What does Polyphemus do? First, he asks his name, and then he feeds on him. It's a grim joke. But let me end here that Odysseus does make it home, but he suffers a lot. And all of the suffering Odysseus suffers is because in the cave of the Cyclops, he is a bad guest. When they arrive at the cave, they help themselves to the food. You don't do that. If I'm a guest, I don't go into your house, open up the refrigerator, and take what I want. Right? You give to me, but I don't. Right? It's a balancing act. And it's not only bad. His men say, let's leave now, Odysseus. And he says, no, I'm going to stay because I want to meet the host. Maybe he'll give me a big prize. Okay, look, often the host will give you one, but you don't come extorting one. Do you understand? This is a balancing act. And again, without a legal justice system, this is justice. People enacting Eidos, Nemesis, Themis, and Xenia, and being people who are just and not just people who act justly. Oh my God, it's exactly zero. Father God, we thank you so much for this incredible ability to get together at this wonderful conference with other people who love you and who love classical Christian education and who love and care about the next generation and want to raise them up to have that internal sense of what is right, of what is shameful and what is not shameful. Lord, help us in this room to nurture and instill these values not only in our children, but also in our students. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. We covered it again. I am going to, thank you all. I'm going to walk over to the 8-day books if you want to sign and if you have a few questions, and then I'm going to have to run off.